Well, the U.S. Embassy in China calling on U.S. citizens there to keep a 14-day supply of medication, water, food as well, signaling an intensifying of the lockdowns. Joining me right now is Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane, is here. General, it's great to see you this morning, and such an important topic that I want to get your take on. These protesters in China, this uprising of the people. How significant is this move? Is it significant enough to actually question the viability of Xi Jinping's continued grip on power?
Well, I don't think we're there yet, but this is the most significant challenge that President Xi has faced internally. For sure. And Maria, this is largely a crisis of Xi's creation. I mean, it's his uncompromising zero COVID standard that he's imposed on the entire population is kind of a function of the cult of his personality here. Remember what he said right from the beginning when he shut down Wuhan city back in 2019. He believed that his authoritarian regime could better handle a crisis like a pandemic than democracies. And he kept pointing at the United States as an example of how not to do it because of the rise in deaths in the United States and not a commensurate rise in deaths in China. And what he has done to himself, he's really boxed himself in, Maria, because he's locked the people down. And at the same time, he hasn't developed vaccinations that are effective in his own country, and he's rejected the Western vaccinations, particularly the Moderna-oriented vaccinations that have proven to have such a positive impact on developing immunity for people. And this is staggering, and he also hasn't improved in 3 years, Maria, his public health system. So what he's boxed himself in the sense that if he loosens this up, as he tried to do in November, and got people's expectations arisen because of that. And then as the COVID began to spread, he locked it back down. And with the fire in Xi and that policy, that's what's triggered this thing. But if he opens it up again, his public health system can't support it. His vaccination program will not be effective to deal with the people. And we already know he's crushing his economy. So he's got a major problem on his hand.
Yeah.
Whether it comes to a crisis where his regime is being challenged, time will only tell.
Well, the fact that they are not importing the mRNA vaccine from the West, I mean, raises the question, is this all about power? Is this all about throwing the rules down the way that they threw the rule down in Hong Kong and started throwing all the freedom fighters in jail? Because, I mean, why not get the vaccines to actually create a healthy population? General, I mean, look what's going on in Hong Kong right now. The chief executive of Hong Kong saying that he's going to ask China and the CCP to intervene after the city's top court rejected a government bid to stop a UK lawyer from representing Apple Daily founder Jimmy Lai. You know that Jimmy Lai has his upcoming national security law trial. Lai's trial is expected to start on Thursday, General. And they want to stop this lawyer from the UK from representing him. And now the Hong Kong CEO wants the government to intervene. How does this play out?
Well, two courts in Hong Kong, vestiges of the past, recognize that Jimmy Lai has a right to a lawyer and his right to a British lawyer if he so desires. The Hong Kong government, in bed with China, a reflection of China itself, has appealed to China to make the decision. You can know what the answer is going to be. They likely will reject the use of a British lawyer. In full disclosure to our viewers, Jimmy Lai is a dear friend of mine and very concerned about his welfare here. And he has stood up while all the people who are in jail, by and large, with him have pled guilty for charges they're not guilty of, Jimmy Lai has pled not guilty. He refuses to lie to the people in Hong Kong, to the people in China, to the people worldwide. He just is going to continue to tell the truth, and obviously he may pay a severe consequence for that. He's one of the bravest people I've ever met in my life, how he has stood up against this Chinese regime He's a man of immense independent wealth, and he had huge choices. And he's in jail because he said, yeah, I have choices, but most of the people here don't have choices. Yeah. And as a result of that, I'm going to stand with them.
Yeah, a man of integrity. He's been on this program, a friend of this program. This reason I bring him up so much is because we're trying to cherish and praise his legacy. We know what he's done, but, I mean, look at what the pressure that has developed in China. You've got the protesters on the ground. You've got people across the world understanding the CCP's hand and how they just throw their law down. What are your thoughts on whether or not the free world is going to confront this? And, you know, look, yesterday, John Kirby was asked a question by Peter Doocy about, you know, giving us a statement on the people of China. And they said that they think that they should, you know, be able to protest peacefully. But really, where is the support for the people? There wasn't any support for the people of Iran, okay? The courageous women who took to the streets continue to do so today. Are we really supporting the people of China? Is this administration going to do anything more to push back on authoritarianism and totalitarianism?
Yeah, it's staggering because this administration came in and felt that, you know, United States foreign policy under previous leadership, going all the way back to President Bush, was too muscular in terms of using military power. And what we had to do is use diplomacy to accomplish our objectives. And, of course, everybody agrees with that. When diplomacy fails, at times you have to use force to accomplish your objectives. But the reality is this is diplomacy. And not to answer the clarion call of the Iranian people who are 2 months plus into this demonstration, the greatest threat to their regime is taking place right now. And possibly the same is unfolding in China. And the United States should not only have a loud voice here, but we should organize the democratic countries of the world to speak up and support the peoples that are fighting these authoritarian regimes and risking their lives to do it. I mean, so the American people understand China's internal security apparatus, they spend more money on that than they do on defense, on their own military. They have a people's armed police that neighbors in the numbers of 700,000, has nothing to do with the military. It exists just to control the population, something Deng Xiaoping put together after Tiananmen Square. They have hundreds of millions of AI-enabled cameras that go across the whole swath of the country. They surveil on a regular basis using human and algorithmic sensors. All the apps that people are using to communicate, to use public transportation, to make purchases. And under the COVID restriction codes that they have, you have to check your phone to see if it's red or green to go to a grocery, to use public transportation, even to use a public bathroom. This is the control that they have. When the people are on the streets fighting, I think it's larger than the COVID restrictions. They're fighting for human dignity. They're also fighting for personal freedom. And that's really what has taken place here.
That's right, and which is why I'm fully expecting the CCP to come back and go to the homes of all of those people. They've got them on surveillance camera. They're going to follow up and punish anybody who's in the streets. We're going to be watching whether or not the administration then speaks up, if in fact that takes place as well. General, we hope that we'll be talking with you along the way as well. Thanks very much for weighing in on all of that this morning.